Welcome back. We're now going to hear from various people and groups from across WA about their joint management experiences and takeaways. This will be directly followed by another Q&A session. This panel will comprise of Dr. Jose Culpers and from YMAC, Dr. Bill Cruz from the Pure Charitable Trust, Luke Bentley, along with his colleague Craig Oldnick from DBCA, as well as several of the other presenters that we're about to hear from very soon. While you can continue to submit your questions to the live function area during this next presentation, we'll hold off interrupting these presentations and we'll ask them at the end of the during the panel discussion. Unfortunately, the representatives set out in today's to present today on behalf of the Kurrara Tanadi Gurrabal Aboriginal Corporation from the Gascoyne had to withdraw last minute. However, we're still hearing from different groups from the Kimberley, Pilbara, Western Desert and South Coast. So I'll just introduce the next speaker, and that is Ben Puglisi from the Nyangumarta Warrarn Aboriginal Corporation in the Pilbara. And I'll hand it over to you, Ben. Thank you.
Just like to acknowledge the Yara people whose country I sit today. I'm in the Nyangumarta office here in Buru, and also the Nyangumarta people on whose country and joint management agreement I talk about today. So we don't have too long each, I don't think. I've got a simple presentation, but I think for the moment, George, if you can just keep me on. Yeah. All right, no, that's good. Just stay on that page for a little bit. I'll just have a bit of a chat, I guess, about our agreement, and later on I'll get onto some of the projects and a bit of a slideshow there. So Nyangumarta Warrarn IPA covers a really big area on the northwest coast, encompasses the 80-mile Beach Marine Park, Warrarn Conservation Reserve, and also the Warrarn Nature Reserve, which is along the terrestrial part of about 100 kilometres of 80-mile beach. The IPA then extends out into the Western Desert for about 300 kilometres, and it's about 3 by 100 kilometres, so it's a really big area. We started our ranger team around the same time as a joint management agreement with DBCA around 2014. And we also have an Ilua Indigenous Land Use Agreement, and I think Luke and Craig spoke pretty well about what those agreements entail. Some of the special things we have with Nyangumarta included in the Ilua is a provision for 2 permanent employees, Nyangumarta traditional owner employees with DBCA, and we're sort of in the middle of what the Kimberley-Pilbara boundary dissects our IPAs, but we happen to be aligned with the Kimberley Parks and Wildlife Office. We've had a huge success with the joint management agreement we have with them. Most of that, I think, can attribute to some fantastic staff in the Kimberley office. The fact that we do have 2 Nyangumarta TOs employed permanently with DBCA, and currently one of DBCA's rangers is a former Nyangumarta IPA ranger. Has been nominated for Ranger of the Year awards and is the current operations officer for 80-mile Beach Marine Park. We have one other, we're soon to replace one other position there. Some of the advantages that we saw with that, it's a bit of a hybrid system that we use. So we have 2 Nyangumarta employed with DBCA, and then out of our ranger team, we also offer fee-for-service provision to DBCA. So I'll run through some of the projects that we work on that with. As you can imagine, it's any work that we do on 80-mile Beach, to be doing it with a Nyangumarta TO who's the permanent ranger there. That's really speaks volumes for the success of our joint management agreement, and I think probably as well as the staff, we have a really regular dialogue with the BCA. So all of the work that we do in 80 Mile Beach Marine Park and along the terrestrial reserve and also Warrarn, we communicate with them, and all of their work they communicate with us. And if we are joining in for fee-for-service work, the real benefit is that we can take, and I think Jose touched on it earlier, we can take out elders, we can take out children, and we can really give some authenticity to the sort of exchange that goes on out there. And essentially, the BCA staff are totally fantastic, are great for the tools, are great for methodology, but essentially you get them out in the field, and a fantastic example is that on a perfectly level playing field, full of bilby burrows, searching for bilby scat. One of our ladies collected about 63 examples of scat in exactly the same time in exactly the same area as a permanent BCA staff member collected about 8. So this sort of knowledge of country and recognition of signs and just being able to spot things out there, quite apart from any cultural sort of cultural benefits that the Nyangumarta team can bring, the actual filling out methodologies, you can have a couple of the BCA staff searching for a long time for bilby burrows, or they can ask our ranger team where there's some bilby burrows, and the knowledge of country from the traditional owners, saves the BCA a whole lot of money, adds to the sort of genuine nature of land care to be incorporating mainstream systems and traditional ecological knowledge. So we really have a fantastic relationship with those guys. I think the hybrid system that we use, where we do a bit of fee for service and also having the 2 rangers employed, is a really, really great way forward for us. So in terms of management, the ILUA and the joint management agreement gives Nyangumarta the opportunity to make decisions about the management of the parks and conservation reserves, help design policies, decide where the expenditure for the the funding for the parks is going. They also play a big role in monitoring the work of the BCA and also our ranger team, and communicating what sort of works we've got up to, what are priorities, what are sensitivities in terms of cultural practice. They also, with the joint management, we get a really good opportunity to guide customary hunting practices and legislation, or the sort of rules and regulations that go in under 80 Mile Beach Marine Park. And I guess the best part for everyone aware of time, that is getting out and working with these guys. The other thing that the BCA really bring to the table is experts in the field. So on many occasions they can refer to who the best person is to be bringing on board, and we have joint management field trips quite often with the 2 permanent rangers, but also with our fee for service team, but included in our work plan. So we work under IPA funding and Indigenous Advancement Strategy, federal NIAA funding. So we have a huge work plan ourselves, and we can incorporate extra bums on seats, basically, which is our mantra, that we need to get TOs out on country. That's where the real work happens. They also do training through the BCA, which benefits the rangers. I might go through some of the projects because I think I might be running out of a bit of time. So George, if you're happy just to move on to the first slide. So obviously in 8 years we've done a whole lot of projects. These are all in the last year. These are joint management projects that we do along with the BCA staff, often an expert in the field. We had the bee expert off Costa's gardening show, really charismatic lady come along and head out to Warrarn with us and identified 2 species yet unnamed to Western science, and also found a whole lot of colonies of native bees, which our TOs refer to as sugar bag when they set about going up the Melaleucas and taking honey out in the wild. So that was a really fantastic joint trip. We can go next slide. Happy, Georgia. Kurrara Exchange, so our ranger team participates in ranger exchanges with Indigenous Desert Alliance and other partners, and we also have a trip a year incorporated into our IPA management, into our IPA funding and work plan. On the left, we have Augustine Badell, who is now working again with the Nyangumarta Rangers and giving someone else a chance to jump on with the BCA, but at that time was employed by the BCA. So it gives the BCA staff an opportunity to get out and see what the Indigenous Ranger teams are doing. I guess that can be sign language for next slide, Georgia, if you're good with. So Walyata Bilby survey, we do Bilbies being a really charismatic small furry animal. We seem to get a lot of funding through. We've got greater desert skinks, but they're not quite as cute. But we do a lot of work with bilbies with the BCA. That's definitely one of their target species, along with night parrot and greater desert skink, black-flanked rock wallaby, and quolls we're found now in Nyangumarta country. So we do a lot of work on threatened species. Traditional ecological cultural mapping is another activity. And Nathan on the far right there is the other permanent BCA Ranger. He recently was nominated for Ranger of the Year award, and happy to say that the coordinator, another fellow, Bob Smith, was nominated for the Coordinator of the Year award. Sorry, I think he won the award recently. Maybe the BCA staff can answer that one. But we have a really fantastic team, I guess, working with the BCA that's raised the bar, I guess, in this area for interactions between TOs and government. We can go over. Turtle monitoring. So this is along 80 Mile Beach. We get literally thousands of flatback turtles come up on shore during November to lay eggs, nest and lay eggs. So we do a yearly turtle nest survey and exhumation of eggs after their hatching time. So we do that jointly with the BCA and their rangers. We share the data, and there's a long-term project that's looking at the health of that flatback turtle population. Am I okay for time, Georgia? Fencing is another really great activity we do with the BCA. If you can imagine, we have this huge country area, and some of the sites are culturally significant and others have more environmental significance. If the BCA were left to their devices, they'd be putting fences around all the prettiest areas, I imagine, and those protecting threatened species, which is a fantastic thing to do. But when it comes to fencing on areas that are managed by traditional owners, there's plenty of areas that are identified as cultural sites. So where we put the fences is really important on Nyangumarta country. So this is one of the best projects we do, often to keep cattle out of sensitive areas, fence off cultural sites, places of significance to the TOs. So it works really well. Fish surveys we did recently with Department of Fisheries and the BCA. This was one of the more favourite projects, I guess, of the ranger team. They had to pull up a whole lot of fish and remove their otoliths. None of the fish made it up to Broome. They all got consumed down in Bidgidanga and south of, which is the normal sort of state of affairs with bush tucker with our group. But another really great opportunity using Western science to manage fishery along 80 Mile Beach. So yeah, really, really significant work, aiding fisheries, aiding the BCA, and making sure that fish stocks are going to be well looked after into the future. I think I might be on about time. Is that right, Georgia? Alrighty. Sorry, I also have Aisha Moss here, who's on secondment from Environs Kimberley. She's been working in the office and she's here to make me nervous, but also to have a listen in. It's been a great session for learning about joint management. Thanks very much.
And thanks for running on time, mate. So I'll go across to our next speaker, and that's from Tarlka Matuwa Piarku Aboriginal Corporation, and that's Manjinjara and Yalparai, Western Desert. And I'll ask Dr. Dorian Moro if he could give his presentations. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Bill. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that. Well, thanks for allowing me to share our work with DBCA. And firstly, I want to acknowledge the Wajak country that I'm living on at the moment here in Perth. But I also want to pay my respects to the Tarlka Matuwa Piarku Matu of the Western Deserts. They allow myself to do their work on country, and they allow this fantastic work to be showcased to all of you. What I do want to just acknowledge to start with, we work with DBCA at the moment. We do not have an ILUA in place. That's currently a negotiation. But what I do want to share is how we partner and work with a variety of stakeholders, including DBCA, over the last couple of years, and take on board some lessons learned, but also some advantages for the Matu rangers and also for other people working on country. I can provide a bit of context. So Matuwa Kurrara is found in the northern goldfields. It's approximately 2 hours from Wooloona. It's an area, it's an Indigenous protected area of approximately 600,000 hectares. So just a bit of context, and context is important in the landscape of Matuwa Kurrara. There's a long traditional owner history, and the connections of the traditional owners to the IPA area are quite deep. And the long history of Matu was that they were employed as stockhands during the 40s and to the 1970s. So they did have this connection with pastoralists in the area. And what's referred to as Matuwa Kurrara was under non-Indigenous control from 1967 and 72, when the leases of Lorna Glen and Yirahedi were purchased. And the Matu period, the Matu people were taken on as stockhands, and they were employed by stockists with employment, drovers and housemaids, so that they were still able to return to the country back then. And there's a lot of personal history that connects current day Matu to that area. The Lorna Glen were purchased by the state of Department of Conservation Land Management in the early 2000s, and it became exclusive possession native title determination in 2013. And that was recognised through the strong connection of the Matu to the country and to significant areas across that IPA. It was declared an Indigenous protected area in 2015, and a country plan was put together for a 5-year window. And that country plan was put together with consultation with the local Matu, both on-country and off-country workshops over several sessions. And it was being managed by Central Desert and Desert Support Services during that time. That allowed the people to connect back to the country to undertake some land management, and in part in connection with the state or DBCA over that window. Now, TIMPAC as a PVC went through self-governance in the mid-2020 when the land management company, which is the operational arm for the ranger company, Nyangumarta, was formed. And that's really was, I guess, the continuation, but more solid formation of the Wooloona Rangers as it became operational. The current program for the Wooloona Rangers to manage state and IPA funding. And so there's 2 large grants that we have. And we've also strengthened our working relationships with DBCA. It's important to understand the current structure of our organisation. We have TIMPAC as the PBC, and the whole organisation and the Ranger Company aspires to the 3 values of Māori, which is people, country and culture. And that's what connects, they're the central pillars of the work that's conducted at Matuwa and Kurrara. We have underneath the Mantle Parira, which is the operational arm of the Ranger Company for TIMPAC. And it has a board of directors, which are all Māori, and also it's supported by an MKK IPA management team, of which I support. And that's essentially the Wiluna Māori Rangers, which work in conjunction with DBCA and other informal partners. So what's working well? Well, at the moment, with DBCA, there's good bilateral working relationships. DBCA in Kalgoorlie region, as part of the Northern Goldfields region, they accept that there's a working relationship and it's well established with the Māori there, the Wiluna Rangers. There's respect by DBCA of the working relationships and the cultural values Māori bring to the area. The Rangers also participate in all activities on country. This is now standard. So there's no work that happens at Matuwa that doesn't have Rangers participate. And DBCA accept that, acknowledge that, and welcome that. In terms of technical support, DBCA provides some funding and provide funding to employ a senior operations officer, including other DBCA staff, to help support the trips that occur on country. And these are important because of the isolation of Matuwa from the near town of Wiluna. DBCA provide technical expertise in land management and science programs. A lot of scientists work on Matuwa, and there's a good two-way learning that happens with the Māori Rangers to take on board some of the work that is being done there. And there's also programs like the Western Shield feral cat baiting, which DBCA manages. And what's important, it's not just the program, it's all the permitting and licenses that go with that. That just saves on angst with our organisation having to manage that if we were to do it on our own, and probably couldn't do it on our own. While we're supported by 2 large grants, there's also support through additional finances as required. And we also see that personal development for DBCA staff that come onto Matuwa, they gain a lot of that personal wealth from engaging with it and being present with the Rangers and learning, just absorbing the information that Rangers bring on that country. From my perspective, it's important to have good communications at senior level, and that's certainly been welcoming as well. It's an open phone, and the communications between myself as a manager coordinator working with the DBCA managers coordinators has been two-way, and that helps a lot with trying to execute these programs. From the Māori Ranger perspective, they gain exposure and experience in a variety of different science projects and other land management activities. Again, it comes down to this two-way learning. The Māori at Wiluna are quite comfortable being part of a wider team. They're not necessarily there to lead the team, they're there to help and be part of it, and they enjoy the science aspects, and it can be challenging as well. What it does mean with a more regular program is more regular work, and we've got programs happening almost every week now. They're scheduled, and for the individuals, it just brings in more work and security on country. Co-planning is also part of the Ranger program now, particularly for work like the right way burning. Co-planning means discussing areas to be burned at Matuwa, and this is particularly on country with Rangers involved, and then getting the Rangers involved with DBCA to undertake the right way burns. Having some infrastructure on Matuwa helps, which DBCA had set up initially when they purchased the land, and that's important to have that infrastructure and tools in place because we're in a remote area, and just basic things like kitchen facilities, just shovels, other tools and equipment that's not often available. But having that present, someone looking after it, helps with execute the programs quite well. And finally, the two-way learning. I can't emphasise enough what the Māori call the Napaji way. a bit of a learning either way between Madu and whitefellas and Madu, particularly when it comes to different programs. The right way burning is a good medium and a balanced medium that we seem to be operating in. By no means a perfect world, and as we go forward, we learn and try and improve on what we do. So the clear challenge as two organisations, we have both government and traditional owner cultures there. Separate organisations have separate, HR and other OHS expectations and systems that we have to negotiate. An example, burning a DBCA style versus Madu style, very different ways of burning and thinking about what to burn for different reasons. And again, that comes down to the two-way learning about the Madu learning of what DBCA's risk-averse approach is to burning versus DBCA recognising Madu's need for burning for hunting purposes and so forth. That's been quite a useful learning exercise. One of the other challenges, it's separate project schedules. So often things change in time, and while we try and execute projects based on a timetable, plans change, people aren't able to get to site, rangers aren't able to get to site. It's very hard to have a big science program proceed to, or plan to go to the field if we're not ready as rangers to meet scientists there. So we just have to negotiate different timings. And likewise, DBCA have their own training requirements and staff requirements, and they're not always able to be on site when we have scheduled trips. But again, that's something we've been able to be sort of negotiate on a case-by-case basis in time. And to their credit, DBCA and Kalgoorlie have supported us with alternative staff to come to site as needed. Likewise, Madu have their own social and cultural requirements that change over time, whether it's sorry periods or just family reasons they can't attend site when they need to. We have to negotiate, given the requirement that rangers are on site with all programs, that does need some careful planning and alternative, plan Bs and sometimes Cs and plan Cs and Ds as well to be looked into. The other challenge we've come across is essentially the boundaries associated with our funding streams, which are both focused on the Matuwa, Kurrara areas, i.e. the park area boundaries for the IPA, but really cultural boundaries don't have park boundaries in mind. So when we do return to country trips, we have to recognise that some of the funding is not just within the borders of the MKK area. They're following song lines or story lines will cross those areas, and we have to be flexible in how our funding is negotiated. Purchase of key assets is not always possible. Something as simple as obtaining a trailer is not always possible without current funding streams, and that's been a challenge. And then a challenge of remoteness, which is not unusual in the Indigenous space, but Matuwa, Kurrara is a 2-hour drive from Wiluna. It's a 5-hour drive from Kalgoorlie, and it can take a whole day just to get there and negotiate people and get them to site. Equipment resupply, vehicle maintenance, they're all other challenges we face in a remote area that takes time to sort out. In terms of lessons learned, well, the key lesson learned really is a phone call. Phone calls make a big difference between talking to Madu people. It also makes a big difference with talking to DBCA as well, and often you can say so much more over the phone than you can through an email exchange. Currently, the working relationship between DBCA and our ranger work is very comfortable. The best part of it is the can-do mindset that everyone takes on board. Cultural learning, there's cultural learning by the white fellas all the time, and I think that's quite that introduces the diversity in the work environment that people enjoy coming to Matuwa and experience. And finally, joint calendars. We have a joint calendar between DBCA and ourselves, and so we can see when all the programs are planned for, and that's what we try and stick to going forward. Oops. Finally, a couple of unknowns. There's always some unknowns in these new programs. We're 2 years into working with DBCA at the moment. Going forward, should there be a more formalised arrangement made with DBCA in the future, whenever that is, what is Indigenous government? We're operating within a self-governed organisation already, but what does Indigenous governance look like? And what's the role of our directors and IPA advisory team going forward if there's a more formalised system in place with DVCA? And from the Madu Walluna perspective, who speaks for and makes decisions about Matuwa, Kurrara ranger work under a joint management system? That's some of the areas we're going to have to negotiate. In terms of program functionality, how's the annual budget going to be determined? Currently, we self-operate on our own our budget. We can self-regulate ourselves based on the money that's available, but going forward under a joint system, we're going to need to understand what's this look like and how the decision's made. And importantly, how are the field programs decided upon, especially if we need to think about the beyond the IPA area budgets for return to country trips, because there needs to be some flexibility and allowance made for that. Training expectations. Training is important in our system, but it's very Matu trained in different ways. They follow an experiential learning system. They don't want to sit in a room of four walls. And if there's a more formalised arrangement made with DVCA, will there be an expectation of a more formalised training, which may not suit the current ranges that work for us? Contracts and contractor liability. Who's responsible for work on country under a more formalised arrangement? That's a bit of an unknown. Importantly, for traditional owners, if DVCA have their own staff from other areas coming to MKK, we need to understand cultural differences of people coming onto country that may or may not be acceptable from the cultural regimes of the Walluna Madu. And again, that's a bit of an unknown as well. And then finally, I've put down what's called the unknown unknowns. There's probably a plethora of other unknowns that we are yet to cross and need to negotiate going forward. That's why I think this type of forum is quite useful, and be useful having more recurrent forums like this going forward. And finally, in terms of future opportunities, our Walluna Madu Rangers, it's a proud group of people, and we've established a group of ladies and men and casual rangers. And one of the key, they want to be proud and be an exemplar team for their people and the next generation that they're teaching on country, the kids that come out from the local school and participate in the two-way science activities. So we want to keep that standard being really high. One of the other opportunities of any more formalised arrangement, if it does bring in more money, is the opportunity to get some of these assets we can't otherwise gain. Accommodation in Walluna is a challenge. We don't have accommodation for people coming to and from Walluna at the moment, even though TPAC has named the title over the area. Improve skills and jobs for Walluna Madu. That's always an opportunity going forward from an economic point of view, especially within the tourism area. I think tourism as a stable income stream for the Walluna Madu Rangers would be a good way that they can use their culture as part of sharing knowledge to other people that pass through. And I'll leave the presentation there.
Thank you, Dr. Moro. That was great. Do have another presentation now, and I remember the live Q&A session. If you put your questions forward, we'll answer these questions at the end of this session. So I'd like to introduce Nyangumarta Yaru Aboriginal Corporation from the Kimberley, and that's Dean Matthews and Julie Melbourne. I'll hand it across to them for their presentation from the Kimberley mob. Yep, thanks.
Thank you. Just going to try and share a screen. Yep. Okay, so to begin with, we'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Western Australia and pay our respects to the elders past and present, and in particular those groups whose country we're hearing and talking about today. So our situation is, I guess, a little bit different from others. We're based in Broome, a big regional centre of the Kimberley, and which is also identified as a key tourism destination. Yaru people went through a long litigation of their native title rights, and a determination was made in 2006. As a result of that determination, the government was very keen to engage in a settlement of the native title rights and interests, and so two Indigenous land use agreements were negotiated in 2010, and this included the setting up of the Yawuru conservation estates. And another key part of that of the Iluwas was the development of the Yawuru Cultural Management Plan, which is this top plan, and basically that sets out the history, the cultural history, the aspirations, the landscape, the habitat, everything that is important for Yawuru people. And that became the blueprint for the joint management plans, of which there are 4, spreading across parts of Yawuru country. Under the Iluwas, there was also funding agreed to. Yawuru was provided a bucket of money, and the DBCA was provided a equal bucket of money, and that went together to be administered through the department for the development of the plans and the establishment of the joint management program, including the rangers and the coordinators and operational matters, and then the subsequent implementation of the plans. So there's 4 plans: the Birigan, the Minyaburu, the Guni and Bimba, and the Nuglagun, which is the marine park.
I suppose a bit of a take-home note there is that I think, some of the questions coming through from the floor is it good to have your healthy country plans established prior to coming into the joint management process? To answer your question, yes. I think, having the Yawuru Cultural Management Plan, which is like a healthy country plan, it is the vision, goals and aspirations of Yawuru people in regards to how they foresee their country and how they want to manage it. So yeah, look, I think there was an important part to having the cultural management plan and having time to develop the plan to feed back into the joint management plan. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, having a cultural management plan is helpful in the next stage of coming into negotiation and developing the cultural management plans, the joint management plans. And interesting to note there that Yawuru really wanted to change the flavour of how joint management plans look in the state of Western Australia. So you can see the artwork is reflective throughout and on the cover of those joint management plans that ties back to the cultural management plan. Yeah, so and the other interesting point to note there that Yawuru wanted cultural KPIs within those management plans. So that was a new I suppose, a step in context of joint management plans in the state, having cultural KPIs and at the forefront of these documents, not putting the cultural values at the back end of these joint management plans.
And that was a provision of the ILUA, that those joint management plans had to be consistent with the cultural management plan. So it didn't leave anything open to interpretation and uncertainty. It was a very clear pathway in the planning process to make sure those cultural KPIs were front and centre of the management plan.
And the cultural management plan was part of the ILUA negotiation, so there was money dedicated through the ILUA for the development of that document. Yeah. So that was if we're looking at some of the lessons learned and positives, that was a positive.
Yeah. We're now like 10, 12 years down the track, so we're talking some time ago, but for those groups, looking at, starting this process, that is one aspect that has always been a really, really strong benefit and an ability to guide the planning by having that base document, the cultural management plan, in place, that was done through community consultation and really reflected what was important for the community, the landscape, the history, and the cultural sort of framework. This is just a map to contextualise the joint managed areas. The pink area is the sort of in town around the coastal reserves of Broome, and that area is managed jointly by Yawuru, the Shire, and there's a service agreement to DBCA for undertaking those on-ground activities in that area. The green area is the Berrigan out-of-town conservation parks, and that's jointly managed between the Shire and DBCA. The marine park is the Shire, the Shire, Yawuru and DBCA. The marine park is Yawuru and DBCA. And the yellow section up the top is a tripartite arrangement between the Shire, Yawuru and DBCA. The hatched areas across the top of the conservation parks and extending out across Roebuck Plains Station is the area of our IPA, which was we commenced that process just after the signing of the ILUAs, and we received government funding for that. That was from about 2010 to 2016 that was dedicated. So you can see that the IPA overlays all the conservation park areas, as well as overlays significant springs and wetlands represented in those blue areas as the key management zones and the white stripes of the IPA, and the black zone, zone 2, is representing a connectivity across the landscape, connecting those critical environmental and cultural values out there together. And so that's the representation of our management jurisdiction, I suppose, and how they interact. And this is a bit of an attempt at looking at that land management framework. We've got the PBC is the parent body of the corporate group. Not reflected in here is the corporate group, which is PBC, Nyangumarta, which is the operating arm of the PBC, and then other subsidiaries that now hold Roebuck Plains Station. And so, but the PBC is in the joint management agreements, and in the ILUAs was the body that is the formal partner in the conservation estate frameworks. So this is just a representation of the conservation estate and the IPA, and falling out of the conservation estates is the governance arrangements. The Yawuru Park Council deals with the terrestrial areas, and the marine management body deals with the marine park. In between that, not reflected here also, is really where the engine room of the workings of the conservation estate happen. It's not a formal arrangement. It's not reflected in joint management agreements, but it is an absolute necessity to undertake the management, the planning and the prioritising and the actions that are needed to implement the joint management plans, and that's the creation of working groups that are made up of the different partners, Yari, DBCA and Shire, to just churn out all the work that comes through implementation, the planning of priorities, and the partnerships, the research, the compliance, the external stakeholder matters. It's huge, the amount of issues that come through the system, and perhaps more so in Broome, where there's a number of external stakeholders that want to do things in the conservation of parks. So it's really starting from a clean slate and developing policy about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable to happen within the bounds of regulation, but on the conservation of parks. And within the joint management regime, Yari rangers are employed by the department, so they're public servants and they get the benefits of being public servants. But they are limited to working within that joint management jurisdiction. And then within the IPA, which is based out of the MBY, the Yari offices, we have a team of what we call country managers to distinguish that team from the Yari rangers, who work predominantly, well, on the IPA, predominantly on Roebuck Plains Station, but also quite a lot of collaboration with the joint management team, and also working in the in-town areas of the coastal reserves and the parks, where there's a lot of people, there's a lot of maintenance, and there's a lot of weeds through urban development, and revegetation needed. So there's a massive amount of work within the conservation estate. So there's opportunities there for very strong collaborations. And at the moment, this works well for us. When we get to the challenges, we've highlighted the fact that sometimes it depends on the personnel, the individuals in the roles, and that there needs to be a lot more review and alignment with the institutional processes and policies of the department with joint management, and to make sure the values and the operations and the decision making align with and reflect the fact that the joint management is with native title holders, traditional owners, that and that equal participation that has been raised before needs to, be reflected in that. Anything else?
Yeah, look, and I think a critical take-home message there in that governance framework is allowing us to have time and resources which are critical. We're talking about decision making, the Yarra prescribed body corporate on top, and the decision making of the Park Council and the Marine Management Body, aligning that with the decision making process of the prescribed body corporate can be a little bit challenging sometimes, but I think through the lessons learned over the years that we're trying to rectify those issues. Having the operations officer from the Marine or from the joint management body coming to present to the prescribed body corporate on various aspects to the nature of the business of whether it's in the terrestrial or the marine. So it's sort of having that space and the time. Sometimes the nature of business doesn't align, but it's having the time and flexibility to try to work through those issues is critical.
And I suppose just to make it clear that these are two very different and separate regimes that are operating. The joint management regime operates from the department. The rangers operate from the department, and there is, there is the jurisdiction that they are responsible for. And the IPA is a separate regime that operates out of the PBC, and it has its own plan and targets and deliverables from that plan. However, there is the opportunity to collaborate and to look at how to bring these two regimes together. There has been challenges in that, and I won't say any more about that until we get to that point. But I think it is different from other areas where we do have two separate regimes happening, and it's part of the challenge has been how to align them. And as Dean just said, the other aspect of the joint management in our area is the body of work that is required just to maintain, particularly infrastructure and just maintain parks where there's a lot of visitors, and that insertion of the working group made up of all the different partners that deal with all that that day to day, and also do all the background investigations, research, and then make the recommendations to those governance bodies. If there's not the capacity and the resources for that work to be done, then this joint management doesn't work. It won't work.
Yep.
And there'll be no outcomes against the plans. But we're pretty happy with the way we work with our partners, but there are challenges, which we'll get to. So this is some high-level highlights of our arrangements, and that, as we've mentioned, is that the management plans had to be consistent with the cultural management plan, provides a very clear pathway of how the cultural values are represented, and that they're front and centre in the management plans with KPIs attached to them. Obviously, the fact that there's 6 ranger positions within the joint management program, 4 rangers, an operations officer, and a trainee who has now moved up and taken a role of a ranger. So there is somewhat of a pathway, but limited to the amount of funding. And then that opportunity to collaborate between the IPA management and the joint management is in the context of having 2 different regimes. There is that opportunity there, and that's I guess the benefit of 2 different buckets of resources, skill sets, expertise can be used across programs.
Yeah, look, and I think, just expand on that, the Yaru, so when I think earlier on, we talked at the different models of, joint management. So Yaru, made a decision in the Ilua negotiations to have our rangers housed at DVC, under the DVC roof and structure. I think if we look at the highlights that are experienced over the program, it's the capacity of our ranger team within the joint management program, growing within that delivery of, capital works projects in excess of, $500,000, project leading the development of one of our vessels. So, if we looked at that as the investment from our community in regards to our rangers have, fully credited now, certificate 4, a number of them, and climbing into, growing into other positions within DVCA in the joint management agreement, and taking on higher duty. So if we looked at some of the highlights from us, that's the the capacity of our young men now. Certified and within the joint management program. The other one is the capacity of the joint management body over the number of years. We're learning about the department and vice versa. The department's learning about who we are and some of our aspirations. So yes, I think that's sort of some of the key highlights. We could touch on more, but
So what are the challenges that we've faced? Obviously, the implementation of 4 joint management plans represents quite a complex arrangement. Many of the targets and strategies in the plans are overlapping, and at one stage we did a review and we had about 255 strategies to deliver on. As part of the process of alignment, the IPA under the Yawuru NBY project has been developing a monitoring, evaluation, improvement reporting framework, and we have proposed through our joint management arrangements that we implement a similar, it's a conservation action planning framework that we've used. So we're now going through a process with the joint management team to put into place the same MERI arrangements, so that enables us to really consolidate a number of all the strategies in the 4 plans, to consolidate them and then prioritize them so that there can be some capacity and some light at the end of the tunnel to be able to deliver on some of those strategies and to maintain the health of the targets or reduce the threats, and also to be able to align the work and the monitoring that we do in those frameworks across the IPA and the joint management arrangements. Prior to that, we have 4 management plans and an IPA plan, which didn't necessarily hit. There was no opportunity to share, compare apples with apples in terms of data and what we're doing. So we're hoping that at the end of this process, which is going to be a reasonably long one, but we'll be able to compare apples to apples in terms of data, but also to cross-report, so that work that might happen within the joint management on strategies can be reported across into as deliverables in the IPA and vice versa. And so it's that trying to create a holistic management where we've got 2 regimes working. So that in itself is quite complex, and it has been complex, and it's a continuing process. The other aspect of our arrangements is the complexity of tripartite management governance arrangements. Even joint management with the Shire itself is
so differing tenure arrangements. Just for instance, we manage the in-town A-class reserve between Yawuru and the Shire, and DBCA having a service provider agreement. And if with part of that service provider agreement is fire in the landscape, so that's been a little bit of a challenge we've faced in regards to developing an in-town fire management plan. That's some of the complexities around the nature of the various plans that we have and the agreements that bind them together.
And then aligning the sort of the values and the regulatory frameworks of local government, state government, and then the values of the TO, traditional owner group of Yawuru, who have certain ways that they want to see the land managed, and just bringing all that together. So the development of the management plans themselves was a long process, particularly the in-town one with the Shire. Everyone has their own sort of take on how management should take place, how it looks, who's involved, how the decisions are made, all that sort of thing. So we've had to work through that. And having done that now with plans in place for a few years, we find ourselves having to, we're on a funding, a royalty for region funding arrangement. So we're not on, we don't have certainty of funding for these conservation estates. We're on royalty for regions. One, marine park is on a 4-year application cycle, and the terrestrial on a 5-year application cycle. But until recently, there was no CPI. We've now got CPI in the terrestrial, but not in the marine space. And essentially, the funding that we've been given through R2R is enough to cover the recurrent costs of salaries, wages, equipment, etc. Almost nothing for operations and implementation of projects and plans for,
capital works on country.
all capital works in and of themselves. So the amount of, I think things have shifted since this arrangement was negotiated with other marine parks and national parks that are being negotiated now through the Kimberley. But in a town like Broome, with high pressure from tourism, we're in a position of having very little resources to implement the plans, other than sort of the basic patrol and enforcement type things, and some infrastructure maintenance. But to be able to be expansive and initiatives and undertake some really great research that should be happening here, that is very limited at the moment. Infrastructure, we've had a separate infrastructure grant because of the nature of Broome as a tourist destination. So we've had 4.5 million for some infrastructure development around some of the key high visitation areas. And that is being managed by one of the rangers, as Dean has said, who's built a good level of capacity and skill that he can project manage that. I think the other challenge is the newness of the program when we started was just having the time to understand our partners and what their values and what their constraints were, and that actually did take a few years to really get to know that, and also know that it did depend a lot on personnel. We had a very slow period with the Shire because we had some very difficult people who were involved in the joint management arrangements, and so we just couldn't get anywhere. But we've had a good period, and that's, we have a good relationship now with the Shire and with our DBCA partners at this point in time with the current people in place. I think the other challenge is, I think it's something I've mentioned in the recommendations, but is the fact that a lot of the departmental systems, processes, policies and procedures have not been reviewed, and there needs to be a full review so that all of those decision-making processes and approvals that are, standard processes within the department now align with joint management, and the fact that we're dealing with native title interests, traditional owners, and how their involvement in those processes happens, so that so that joint management can be truly reflected in that joint management, in those processes. Okay. I guess one of the other challenges, because of the complexity and the fact that there are a number of cultural values and targets, is how we measure traditional owner satisfaction and how we measure whether we're meeting those cultural targets, and that's like a work in progress as well.
And the context of that is that, obviously terrestrial plants were never measured or reported in the context of in Western Australia through the Conservation Commission. So it's a point that was taken out. Only the marine parks and the reserves authority had the annual performance and assessment of implementation of management plans. So that was some of the lessons learned out of that journey.
Yeah. So just a few quick grabs of recommendations for other groups for future and for us. We've been engaged in some governance review and governance training funding that enables real management, research and monitoring with evaluation and reporting frameworks. Coordinated approaches in joint management and IPA methods. For example, one of the other things that we've been able to convince the department to do is shift from iTracker or whatever it was to Fulcrum, which is used across many of the ranger groups at the moment, so that there's an ability to gather data, store it, but also compare it in the same way. So that's been a good tick. Yes, I think probably have mentioned most of the rest of them. Some of them are more specific to Yawuru. The other important one for those coastal groups thinking about negotiating with joint management arrangements is, how does the Department of Fisheries engage in joint management? At the moment, there's a real disconnect between marine parks and fisheries involvement, and their involvement and them having a budget allocation from Cabinet is critical for the management of marine parks. I'll leave it there. I think that's probably, unless Dan, you want to add?
I think we're over time, but we're happy to go. But we're probably questions.
Yeah, we can go for questions later. That was just a few indicators that came up in a joint management review that are quite good in terms of what are the good indicators for assessing joint management.
Oh, thank you, Julie, and thanks, Dean, and thanks for that explanation on that importance of having that cultural management plan as a foundation crossing over into joint management plan. Thanks for explaining that. So now I'll move on to our next presenters, which are from Esperance Tjaltjraak Native Title Aboriginal Corporation down the south coast. We have the presenters there is Hayley Graham, Janelle Reynolds, and David Guilfoyle. Thank you for your time. I'll hand it over to Tjaltjraak.
Okay. So we're Warrarn people of the Noongar Nation, based here at Pearl Esperance, so on the south coast of WA, representing the Esperance Native Title Aboriginal Corporation. So we are now planning and negotiating, meeting with DPCA and DPIRB for two purposes, our new national parks and a proposed South Coast Marine Park. So we're going to briefly give you an update on our works that are central to our health country plan, which is the joint management structure. A key element is a focus of the protection and management of our cultural corridors. So joint management platform on our country. We'll probably, hopefully, get to a short film later on.
We run a range of programs with fundings from the federal and state government, as well as our own initiatives, including carbon farming, community arts, education programs, and research programs.
So the Rangers are really active, managing a whole range of projects. This map shows some of the key project areas they did last year based on types of themes like land care and research projects like eDNA, fire mitigation, cultural surveys, site protection. And then we're also mapping at the same time those cultural corridors and putting them into their own cultural plans, as well as our own. Okay. How's that? How's that? Can everybody see? Yeah, so we're working on these individual projects, and this is outside of joint management. We're only just started the joint management planning and negotiations with DBCA and DPERB for the marine park and two proposed terrestrial parks. But we're driving it from a point of view that we're about restoration ecology and focused on cultural corridors. So the projects we're already involved in to deliver the Healthy Country Plan, which is the aspirations of the elders, is actively doing that now. And the basis for our joint management plans are empowering that model into the joint management framework.
So incorporating some of our stuff that we've need to work on. So the cultural camps are really significant. The cultural mapping, all our project range of projects, and family-based consultancy. We've got 6 family groups that we have to represent. The resource research projects and social research and statistic plans. So.
With all that work, with doing camps with the families and the elders and the rangers and the ranger team, is through the management plans that we're presenting to the DBCA as what our aspirations are. We started with, what do you want to do? That was the question to the elders and the community, and we were given over the course of 6 months like 148 management directives. And from that, we broke it into themes and the value systems. So these are the core sort of themes that come out from those management directives that we've blocked it into. So we sort of reversed the process rather than starting with, here's the values, how do you want to manage them? We asked what people want to do, what the elders want to do, what their aspirations are, and then broke into themes that way. So that's the basis of our sort of planning. And then so for the this map shows our own sort of mapping, what we've been doing with registering cultural landscapes, making protected areas that we're looking at to do with partnerships with sanctuaries, and the 2 sort of new proposed national parks in the grey, managing with existing parks. And then we're in negotiations now and planning with DBCA and DPERB to look at the South Coast Marine Park, at least the section that involves Warrarn, and breaking that up into management directives, but also key cultural zones that have their own specific management situations, including the estuaries and some of these island groups and some of these submerged landscapes. Yeah,
so some have cultural stories associated with them. and that's a strong form of management. So the elders are really connected to these places. So some of the important places to conduct cultural ecological research as well. So in relation to ongoing and deeper held cultural obligations for learning and caring for Warrarn Wudja. So these are places that Wurundjeri old people use, and the community want them to be managed carefully, aligning with our ongoing connections and obligations for caring for country. Yeah, so we all our people are visiting Warrarn Wudja to be respectful and come to an understanding and share that the cultural protocols and management, also the cultural science research and monitoring and protection of the areas. The goal is to develop an associated management plan for each of the 6 healthy sea country themes can be fulfilled, and each place and be for now and beyond.
And yeah, we've got a lot out of a cultural exchange with Yaru. Dean and his team came down and gave us a lot of sharing and information about their experience that we've really taken on board with our planning process. So we acknowledge those guys and all of the other presenters here, because it's a lot big learning curve for all of us, but we value and appreciate this opportunity to share.
So some of the cultural mapping with the elders and the rangers, the BRUVs, which are underwater remote video cameras. So training and to be certified through Curtin and Ewan Harvey. So
also the BRUVs with the PhD projects with Tom and GWA Marine Feature, seabird studies with the Uni of Tassie, so that's part of the sheer waters. Also seafloor mapping program, CWA, and also part of the Marine Park Australia. Submerged landscape programs, that's with Ingrid Ward from the UWA and Discovery grant proposal. Strategic patrols and marine debris studies as well, so that's part of the fish ecology with the Moro WAMS and fisheries research. So a few of the guys doing some hearings surveys at the moment. Also ocean safety and skills and cultural knowledge and exchanges.
So what we're sort of presenting to the planning partners, DBCA and DPIRB, is that this team is very active already in managing their sea country, and we're trying to align what's happening already and getting the independent sort of funding and resources to make it a very strong plan. So we're just acting, we're not developing anything from scratch, we're just continuing what the team are already doing and engaged with, and how they're operating. If we've got time, and Georgia can cut this off when we run out of time, but we've got a short film, and the point of showing this film is to give you an idea of the work, what the team are doing, but how, I guess, our joint management planning model relates to situating the cultural corridors management and protection and restoration of those as primary, as key in how we are going to engage in a joint management framework, which is outside park boundaries in a sense, and we're looking at managing the landscapes. Are you right to run that, Georgia?
Nij puja bilya, mama kot ngala mort, Nyangumarta, Nyining kalabal. Puja kawan, pangala kawan, Nija Nyungara pujara walburning. Demenga, Jukan ba, Nundan ba, Jenanin karnan. Ngala karich, Dukan, Kwak, Kora yai, Burawan. Kaya nunduk, Wujarai, Wujarak, Nining. Dutch ngala mud puja, ba wadang, Modajabini. Dema kumbam, Wujarak, Nining. Ba wadanol, Nining, Palak, Nangalong. Korak wanjanyai, Beat karich pula. Benwenerup, puja kwak.
The Benwenerup or the Lord River, is one of our great spiritual highways of sacred and significant importance. And this is also very ecological. Our story here is a creation story. It deals with a dispute between the Mallee the Now, the Wallich, the wedge-tailed eagle, and the people or the Warrarn or the crow. It leads us and tells us about how we've got to look after the country and share a lot of our resources with those around us, whether it be human or whether it be animal, whether it be insect or whether it be bird.
Our stories tell us of these songlines. These creation stories, they are our law, how our ancestors mandate the way we need to care and manage this system. So we have a set of binding principles for the management of the waterways. We inherit the responsibility to uphold these principles and care for the waterways. With our Healthy Country Plan, we are focused on our program to restore the health of our cultural corridors. The river systems and estuaries have cultural and social significance for all Wurundjeri people.
Our old people were forcibly removed from these lands, and we have suffered a long history of dispossession and disadvantage ever since. At the same time, we have seen the country suffer and our landscapes are under pressure.
Even in our generations, our kids would catch feeds of mullet right up beyond the bridge of the river. Now we don't see any.
So in response, we are doing long-term cultural mapping, protecting specific places along the waterway, and working on a landscape scale plan with farmers and agencies to restore the health of the system, reconnecting our broken songlines.
Standing at Benwenerup is what my family used to call it way back then, before it was, named Stokes Inlet. As a kid, we'd come out fishing and camping. We used to collect oysters and shellfish, but there's a lot of runoff from the farms and the chemicals coming in the cascades and down the Lord. You can see there's signs of algal growth. The river catchment from up the cascades, they're just all salt affected. And all the chemicals and all that just comes straight down into the river and the estuary here. It's hard for the shellfish to survive. And we just want to bring back the shellfish that was here once before when we used to come down and fish.
The health of this system is linked to our community's health, as places to hunt, fish and gather bush resources, and to teach cultural practices to younger generations, including caring for country.
With our Ranger program, we work together to carry out cultural surveys of the waterways with our elders, identify the range of heritage values and do a condition assessment of these values with threats and impacts.
We work with specialists from various fields and carry out environmental assessments linked to our ongoing cultural mapping work.
We develop project plans and local partnerships and work with the rangers on a range of land care projects, including revegetation, biodiversity fencing and cultural burning.
At the same time, we develop research partnerships for long-term monitoring of the waterways, including freshwater fish ecology studies, plant studies, seed collecting, and salinity monitoring.
Oh, get up to a lot of things being a ranger. From one day to the next, you're doing something different. But all the time you're out on country and you're caring for the land, you're connecting with the spirits of your ancestors, all the elders and people who walked before. Knowing that they've been there and just seeing all the stone artefacts and spears and tools, evidence of where our ancestors have been. Real special feeling. It just touches your heart. Tracing our family's footsteps and, you know, where they lived, and that all the way along the creek beds to the inlet, to the ocean. It's a sense of pride and good feeling knowing that we're going to be taking care of it, just keeping the corridor along there healthy and restored to its, you know, former glory.
The projects form part of our adaptive management. Cultural conservation corridors reconnect the fragmented landscape and restore our broken songlines.
And when our elders are once again harvesting shellfish from the estuaries, we know that our efforts are working. Country is healing, our community is healing.
Thank you, Hayley, Janelle and David for that presentation. It's good to see that larger cultural landscape perspective coming into play, especially with cultural corridors. So I'd like to thank everyone for their presentations. Once again, we'll open this up now to a forum, open the forum up to questions from the audience for the presenters we just heard from, as well as those presenters that talked earlier on today. Again, please submit your questions through the live Q&A chat books, and then click on the hand icon if you want to get up on stage and ask your question. We do have a couple of questions already from the floor. The first one was from Peter to Ben. Ben, you mentioned there's a requirement of 2 rangers to be employed by the department. Is this a part of the ILUA or some other agreement funded by the department, I assume?
Yeah, so that it's part of the ILUA and was activated by the signing of the joint management agreement. So that's that agreement, or the ILUA's extension was from 2014 through to 24, so a 10-year agreement, I guess, with reviews. Yeah, part of the ILUA.
Thanks, Ben. There was another question for Dr. Moro. This is from Radhika. Are there any instances where TOs and DBCA cannot agree on what's the right way to do things, and how do they manage this?
Look, to be honest, I think that's the exception, not the rule, where there's actual disagreement. It's more a case of different perspectives talking out and finding a solution that meets. The only one that jumps to mind is really when it comes to doing some monitoring science projects on country. You know, there are certain scientific designs that need to be implemented, but that doesn't work time-wise with some TOs. But honestly, it's just about talking things through. So everything's been able to be worked out, and it's not something that we've encountered as a hurdle as yet.
I'll probably put that question as to other people, presenters. I mean, through DBCA's presentation, there was an actual process being evaluated. I think it was mentioned it would go up to the CEOs in that process. Was that right, Craig, in your presentation? It kind of had a dispute resolution process?
Yeah, all the ILUAs and JMAs have got dispute resolution provisions. But as Luke sort of alluded to, and from my experience in the Kimberley, we've all the decisions are sort of made by consensus. So we don't even go to votes for most of the matters we're discussing and making decisions on in the JMB. And if we're not agreeing, or there is some sort of, the alignment's not quite there, we sort of take it offline, and the working groups that Julie and Dean sort of talk to, you sort of start working through what the outcome, what the resolution is, because if you're in a partnership, you don't really want to be at the dispute resolution stage. You want to be at the working together, meeting aspirations, and delivering on the programs that we've got to do together. So, in the sort of 10, 12 years of joint management, it's not even sort of got to the dispute resolution and minister stage. But in my time in the Kimberley, I think we've only voted on one issue, and that was where there was some disagreement within the traditional owner group on a proposal. And it was about sort of the 10 members around the traditional owner table sort of voting on what approach they wanted to take. And then we sort of went through with the majority sort of view of the traditional owner group in that instance. So, there's got to be a theoretical process, and I'm sure at some point there we may get to that. But we put all of our effort is in trying to get sort of into that consensus decision making, and I think that's the best place to actually work through issues as they arise.
There's another kind of like related question for DBCA there as well, Craig, from Jenna Dodge. Is it possible to approach the development of the benefit of packages as a co-design? She said there's current feedback is that work is undertaken by DBCA and then presented back to traditional owners, and it seems to be a one-way process.
Yep, and Luke and I sort of talked to how do we sort of implement a benefits package. So we sort of, it's good this has come up again, because I think that's it's probably worth a bit of clarification. That obviously an ILUA is a negotiation. So as part of that process, what the department's trying to do is try and get some consistency across different joint management arrangements, size, complexity. Julie and Dean sort of talked about the number of sort of additional issues you've got to manage on an in-town reserve. So trying to put together a package that sort of talks about the area we're managing, the complexities around it, and then sort of put what we try and term now as our sort of best offer on the table. In the end, an ILUA is a negotiation process. So if the offer that's put forward doesn't cover that, then obviously traditional owner groups and PBC and representatives sort of can come back and sort of ask about that process and what that budget is, and we sort of work through how we've come to that. The other one is that through the Plan for Our Parks process, we're sort of getting an allocation from government for managing reserves. So yeah, that allocation is sort of provided to the department, and we're trying to get the most amount of funding that we can get for reserve management. And then, like I said previously, it's then about how we implement that funding through the JMB and how we're sort of addressing the management plan and the joint management priorities through those JMB meetings. So that co-designing of the budget amount at the early stages is a little bit limited through that Treasury process and what we get allocated as a department. But we are pushing, it's not in the department's favour or traditional owner group's favour for us to scrimp and save and try and get a small amount. As conservation agency, we want to try and get the most amount of sort of funding available on the table, and then work with the JMBs on how we sort of prioritise where that funding gets spent.
Thanks for that, Craig.
Just one other one, to reflect on as well. In that funding lasts for an amount of time. I reflect back on the Yaru process when that initial funding sort of process ended. We did work very closely with Yaru and the Joint Management Board to redesign and put forward a funding proposal. We didn't get everything we asked for, but we did sort of take that time to sort of work through with our joint management partners. So whether sort of when the initial sort of funding sort of finishes in the ILUA, there's clauses around working together to develop budgets or seek alternative funding, and that's something that, on reflection, sort of we worked pretty closely with Yaru when that did come up.
Thanks. This next question, I might direct this to Dr. Bill Cruz. Do we have joint management database of great consultants who have assisted organisations to carry out joint management, Indigenous protected areas and other monitoring work, etc.?
Am I unmuted? Muted?
Yep.
Oh yeah, good. Thanks for the question. Great consultants is a pretty broad term. Short answer is no, and maybe it's something to think about tomorrow as a possible outcome to sort of work up a bit of a list that could be helpful. Where joint management's already operating and where IPAs are already operating at scale, there tends to be a lot of knowledge, and consultants and people who work in the industry know each other well. It's pretty easy to find people in the Kimberley, pretty easy to find people in the desert and the southwest, but the Pilbara, Murchison, Gascoyne, other places, Goldfields, not so much. So there's a few key organisations that are connected with consultants, but I think it's something we should probably think about as an outcome, because as more of these joint management agreements are coming up and more IPAs and cultural mapping, cultural planning, people are calling out desperately to get the right skill set. And in some places, there's not even knowledge of what that skill set might be. So a heritage consultant, for example, tends not to make a very good conservation planner. That's anyway. So, yep, happy to keep talking about that tomorrow.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just going to put a question across the board, for Tjaltjraak and Yaru and stuff like that. I mean, because some of your presentation did focus on, some of the highlights, but what's been the best outcomes provided by joint management, each of your experiences? And I'll start with Tjaltjraak.
Yeah, well, we're still with joint management negotiations, but I guess that's a start.
Yeah, being at the table, forefront, obviously. That's the main thing, to be able to be there before the conversation starts and being present.
Dean or Julie, you did touch on some of the highlights, but what's been the best outcomes provided by joint management in your experience?
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, look, I think where do you start? But the Yarra agreement's a little bit different, where obviously the joint management body, we have the chair position of the Park Council and obviously the Marine Park Board. So having a seat at the table allows us a bit of equity in regards to how we implement the plans. I think that's been, for me, I think the most crucial part is having an involvement in the governance and overseeing the implementation of the plan. So I think, Julie might have some other points, but I think just off the top of my head for that one.
No, I think that is the structure is such that Yaru have I guess the deciding vote if there was a tie, because the chair has to be Yaru, and also the way that we've set up the working groups. We do a lot of the work beforehand with the partners together. And then send up the recommendations to the governing bodies. Doesn't always get everything over the line. We sometimes have to go back a couple of times, but I think it's a good system.
Yeah.
And the Yarra have certainly got a front and centre part of it.
Yeah, look, I think, Bill, maybe for all of us to reflect on, joint management is relatively new in Western Australia, but I think we've come a long way in context of that. If we looked at the journey of the department in light of where we are now, so I think there is, the state has been quite serious in regards to working towards joint management and making joint management real. Amending the CALM Act to allow traditional owners to undertake customary activities within national parks was a huge leap. So I think, that's some of the key points, I think, from us, from my personal opinion.
Thanks, Dean. Julie. I do believe we may have a live question. Is that right, Georgia? Yeah, we've got a live question from Toni. Do you want to take it away, Toni, and ask your question?
I don't know, I want to take it away, but listening to all of this reminded me, and I've put the link on the discussion bar down the side. I'm not totally au fait with this program, of a link to a joint management workshop that was held in 2012 in Alice Springs by IATSIS, which was all about developing a community of practice. I didn't have a close look at it, but when I opened it up, it occurred to me that a lot of the issues are probably still the same. And the other thing that occurs to me is that WA is in a really good position to have a WA community of practice. I mean, it's effectively what you've got happening now. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that publication on the IATSIS website to you. So I hope it's helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Toni, and it may pay to maybe YMAC might want to put that on the resource in the resource centre as a link as well. There was another question for DBCA I've got up here. Does the state government have a capacity building plan to ensure that all senior staff currently employed in the joint management structure of DBCA and who are predominantly non-Indigenous are replaced by Aboriginal employees? I think that's directed towards you.
I reckon that's one for me then. Yeah, look, I suppose a formal capacity building plan isn't we don't have at the moment. We're currently working on sort of a number of those Aboriginal engagement plans and some strategies internally on how we sort of start developing that and build the amount of Aboriginal employment and the roles that are across the department. Probably more so if I reflect in a regional sense. It's one of the things that we're really looking at to try and make sure that we're not just focused on rangers being the only sort of employment for the department. So we're looking at a number of mechanisms around sort of 50D, 51 sort of positions where we're filling entry-level positions to start with, but sort of roles that people can build their capacity up and come through and fill, with the idea that some of those senior levels or higher level positions are filled over time. So we've got engineers on boats. We've got some of the people in the front office position. We've got project officer positions with Yaru, where the step between the management positions and the ranger positions, we were struggling trying to get people to progress up through that. So we're sort of trying to put in place some interim level positions that help develop people through. So we are working on locally just on a range of different sort of strategies on how we can start building training capacity across different roles that will help sort of people sort of build capacity and actually be able to be looking towards those senior level positions. From a regional perspective, we want a lot more of those recurrent funded positions within the region sort of filled by Aboriginal people. And when you look at people like the Nyangumarta Ranger that was referred to, who's now some of the Yaru staff, they've completed Cert 4s, they're doing really well, they're winning awards, they're competitive for other roles in the department. I think we're making some good progress, but how do we be more deliberate? How do we actually progress that a little bit faster? And I think that's still a challenge for us that I don't have all the answers at this point in time. And I think Luke might have jumped back on. So if he's got anything else that he wants to add, I'm happy to hand over to him on that one.
Luke. Is Luke up? Not on yet? Okay.
The other one that I wouldn't mind just touching on that as well is the sort of that balance between the direct employees and the fee-for-service corporation rangers. when we talked in that presentation about the balance between the two options or flexibility between the two options, that employment with the department and developing skills and the corporate knowledge of the department, if the aspiration of traditional owner groups is for people to fill higher level positions within the department, I think that's a really important thing to consider in the discussion, because if you're a fee for service or sort of just doing work on a reserve as a PBC sort of ranger position to learn the department and then progress into other roles within the department, it's really hard to do that from that fee for service or corporation employment model. So that's probably the other one that's that I'd just add in there, that when considering the different options for employment, if groups' aspirations are for different roles within the department, then that department employment model can help in that progression.
Thanks, Craig. Just a segue question on that, because there was another question earlier on, and I'll ask this of the current presenters that just went. So I'll ask this of Ben, Dr. Moro, Dean and Julie, and Hannah Lee, Janelle and David. One of the questions was, what's the employment profile of your ranger groups currently? Are they part-time, full-time, casual? I'll go with you first, Ben.
Yeah, so look, I think Nyangumarta of the groups that we work with probably a little bit unique in that we've really embraced a bit of a socialist sort of approach, I guess, to running our ranger team. We have almost all, and for the last few years, have had all rangers and cultural advisors. We have about 20 of each employed on a casual basis. So we've really been stressing with NIAA that for our group demographic, I guess, we have people spread all over Marble Bar, Headland, Bidjidanga, Broome. Our ranger base is in Bidjidanga, but it's still 150 kilometres away from the northern boundary of Nyangumarta country. So every week, basically, we need to pile into our utes and cars with a camping trailer, get down to Nyangumarta country and spend 4 days there. So when I was making mention of bums on seats, for us, that's highly relevant, because we need to get people into the cars and out on country, and the more we do that, the better. We currently have 2 part-time rangers employed who have shown a bit of, and the sort of expectation is that they'll be average 3 days per week working with us. But we find, particularly with community life, funerals, cultural business, Nyangumarta are a relatively small group population-wise. We've got about probably 150 total Nyangumarta out there with a whole bunch of other commitments. So we've just found that casual employment scenario works really well for us in terms of people can come for a couple of weeks and disappear. There's not too much paperwork. It's a slightly higher pay rate. So we had a 25% loading. And it gives us the opportunity, I guess, when people go away or travel or in different places, if they're not in Bidgie on the Monday, they can come a week later or a couple of weeks later. So it works really well for us. I think we've impressed on NIAA that that's an appropriate method and a more culturally appropriate means of employment. It's really meeting the middle ground, and it's not setting this standard that to be a good working white fella, you need to go to work 5 days a week, 9 to 5. It's just not where our guys aspire to be. They want to be on country and do a predominantly cultural practice that helps land and sea management, and learn a bit off the BCA and do things that the government set as sort of priorities or significant projects.
Thanks, Ben. Can I pass it over to you now, Dr. Moro, in your experience there?
Similar to Ben, I mean, traditionally and even today, the casual ranger for workforce is the preferred workforce, primarily because it's a shared work across the community. However, what we've tried to move to is a more full-time, Madu full-time concept. And that full-time isn't the white fella 9 to 5. It's more feeling like you're part of a team. And I felt that's been a sense that we're trying to move away from the concept that working on country through these grants is an employment agency. It's not just employment for anyone, it's for people who want to work on country, return and connect. And so this full-time concept allows us to have people identify as rangers, but importantly, it allows us also to train certain people who then come back and are retained on country. And going forward, I think that's quite important for capacity building, because if we invest the time and expense to train individuals and they're no longer around, then we've sort of not really invested in training long term. So currently we have a full-time ladies and men's team. There's only a few number of people there, and then we keep involving the casual workforce as we go forward, but we invest our efforts into the identity of the full-time ranger ladies and men's team.
Cool, thank you. David, same question to you.
Yeah, so currently have funding for like 14 FTE, like full-time positions, but so they're spread between full-time, part-time and casual across that. And then we have senior cultural advisors, which and then we have a circle of elders that are engaged to guide all those processes. So I think Dorian has employed 51 sort of positions. The rangers make up about 50% of that, and there's a cultural governance structure that guides that to implement the plan.
Cool, thanks, David. Julie, did you want to have a crack at that one as well?
Team, there's four. There are full FTEs of the RE Rangers. In the IPA team, we have 7 country managers, and we've just transitioned all but 2 into part-time, 56 hours a week, because that's sort of where our funding sits. But we wanted to do that just to give people security, but also to give a sense that these are real jobs and important jobs. And I guess also to encourage that idea that it is important to turn up at work every day. In our setting, it's people come into the office and we have meetings and sort of plan the week out together. And so if people don't turn up, then that puts a bit of a hole in the team and what potentially have an effect on what can be achieved. In terms of the training, just to communicate that we want to invest in people and to give all that opportunity for training and to build capacity, and that the holidays and sick pay is a good thing. So we've just transitioned just recently over to all but 2 part-time.
Thank you. There's a bit of a follow-up question there, and I'll direct this back to Ben from Michelle Gardner. With the casual approach to ranger employment, do you have any issues with training / qualifications of those performing different tasks or fee-for-service roles?
Look, I think I wouldn't call it an issue, but yeah, the overall, it slows, having that many casual staff slows down the certification process, I guess. So, a smaller team with 4 or 5 full-time members, they're going to get to Cert 4 in conservation, land management, or whatever sort of TAFE units they're studying in association with the program. I guess that's where we have a couple of coordinators, regular and who know the work intimately. But because we've been going this way for a period of time now, all 20 of the casually employed rangers know the work intimately. They might only be up to Cert 2 or Cert 3, some of them. But yeah, look, there's a little bit of designation of roles. So via IMO training, incendiary machine operation, for example, we have designated wingmen and ladies who are mad keen on flying, and they do that training. So I guess it sort of slows down the process, but when you're dealing with the whole of community, we now have 20 plus individuals in community, or casual rangers, a couple of part-time, full-time, who are all competent and capable of doing just about all of the roles, that we fulfill in our work plan. So yeah, I guess it slows it down in that way. Given that we've got those 2 permanent employees with the BCA, when we do have people that really, that's what they want to make a career of it in, then that opens up an opportunity there for them to move forward. So yeah, again, I guess it's going to be group specific, not group certificate, and with our group, it just works. It works really well. We're happy with that level. It avoids some things like tall poppy syndrome. Avoids some people having lots more money than other people in community, which can, the money goes out to family and it becomes less and less incentive to go to work. It just seems to work well with the social environment that our guys have living in Bidgie. Yeah, but whether you call it a difficulty or not, just means we don't have a whole lot. Our guys are developing a bit slower, I guess. They're going up with 4 or 5 TAFE units a year rather than a certificate level a year.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I think we're almost coming to a close. I can't see any more questions coming up, so unless someone's going to try and get one in. But what I was going to do was just thank everyone for their involvement in the Q&A. Oh, actually, there was one. I'll just come up. This is for DBCA. Plans for our parks has Indigenous land use agreements, the Illawarras, and budgets for the next 10 years. What happens after that?
Thanks, Bill. I'll answer that one if you like, mate. So, yep, that's right. The initial funding term for the Illawarras is for 10 years. And then as we get close to the end of the 10 years, then we need to go back to government with a further budget submission to keep funding straight up. And then it's a case of going back to government through the budget process and seeking another allocation, continue the work we're doing.
Okay, and there's another follow-up question there in the earlier presentation. The future management of old national parks was raised. In terms of their joint management, what is the state's position on and plan going forward with them?
Yep. So it's I can't really talk to the states. You're talking about the government's position there, but certainly our position would be where we get approval from government and that along with the level of budgetary support, then we want to look to progress joint management of those parks as well.
Right. Okay. I am going to close the Q&A sessions. I thank everyone for their involvement in the panel and the Q&A session. It's been quite an interesting day. It was really interesting to hear some of the presentations and especially, some of that focus on them cultural KPIs, but also that larger landscape level type of caring for country. Tjaltjraak mentioned, some of them cultural corridors, and people were talking about terrestrial environment out to the marine environment with them largest song lines. So it was quite interesting to see how people are tackling joint management across different areas, and it was great. I'd like to thank all of the presenters involved and thank participants for their time and sharing their ideas. We'll be up again tomorrow, and hopefully we can get a little bit more live discussions going forward. And I thank Toni for being the first one to do one of them live questions. That was great. I want to thank YMAC for organising and hosting the forum. And once again, thank the Country Needs People and the Pew Charitable Trust for their support for this event. I would just advise attendees they'll be able to access the recordings of these forums once they're uploaded and logged back onto the portal. After travelling around today, we'll be heading interstate tomorrow with presentations from Northern Territory, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, as well as hearing from some leading joint management expert, Mr. Dermot Smythe. Sorry. And I hope you've enjoyed and valued the presentations and discussion here today, and look forward to joining us again, same time, same place, for day 2 tomorrow. Thank you all for your time, and the presenters once again.
Thank you.